Flight 742 had been quiet for the first 2 hours, the kind of quiet that made a long-haul journey feel almost peaceful. The engines hummed with a low, steady rhythm, a constant vibration that most passengers barely noticed anymore. Some were watching movies with half-open eyes, others scrolling through their phones, and many had already drifted off into soft, undisturbed sleep. The cabin lights were dimmed to a warm glow, giving the entire aircraft a calm, almost serene atmosphere. In seat 14A, a girl named Elira sat pressed against the window, her knees pulled slightly inward, her hoodie drawn up so far that only half her face was visible. Her long black sleeves covered her hands, and her noise-canceling headphones cocooned her from the rest of the world. She looked like the quiet type, the kind no one paid attention to, the kind whose presence blended into the background like a forgotten part of the scenery. To everyone else, she was simply another sleepy passenger, another face in the crowd, practically invisible. But Elira wasn't sleeping, not really. Behind those headphones, her mind was alert, watching, analyzing, listening to things that others would never even notice. She kept her breathing slow and controlled, her posture relaxed, but her senses remained razor sharp. She had always been like this, calm on the outside, calculating on the inside. And despite her young age, she had lived through situations far worse than turbulence or delayed flights. If anyone had looked closely, really closely, they might have noticed the faint intensity in her eyes, the way she scanned her surroundings even while pretending to be lost in music. She looked ordinary, but she wasn't. The calm ended in one violent second. Without warning, the aircraft jerked violently, as if a giant hand had slammed into it from the side. Several passengers gasped awake, a woman shrieked, drinks spilled. The overhead bins rattled hard enough to echo like thunder. Elira's head snapped up instantly, her eyes narrowing as she instinctively gripped the armrests. Another jolt hit, stronger, harsher, almost like the aircraft was fighting against something it couldn't escape. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, then returned, but with a disturbing pulsing glow. A few oxygen masks trembled inside their compartments, almost ready to fall. And then the captain's voice came on, only it wasn't normal. A captain's voice was usually calm, confident, reassuring even in minor turbulence. But this voice was tight, strained, and trembling with fear he was trying, and failing to hide. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, followed by a shaky breath, we've lost primary controls." The cabin froze. Every sound died instantly. It was the kind of sentence no passenger ever expects to hear, the one that cuts straight through every layer of comfort, every illusion of safety. The captain continued, struggling to keep his voice from cracking. "We are declaring an emergency." A second of silence followed. A long, heavy second. Then chaos erupted. People unbuckled their seatbelts in panic, only to be forced back down by another hard vibration. A baby started crying somewhere in the back. A man grabbed the arm of the person next to him, even though they were strangers. The flight attendants, trained to stay calm, were visibly shaken as they rushed up and down the aisle trying to steady people, their voices trembling as they repeated, "Please stay seated. Please remain calm." But calm was impossible. The aircraft was shuddering like it was losing a fight against gravity. The left wing dipped sharply before leveling again. The engines whined with an uneven, unsettling pitch. Some passengers were praying. Others were making frantic phone calls. Heartbeats pounded louder than the engines. In the middle of this spiraling panic, Elira slowly removed her headphones, not hurriedly, not fearfully, but deliberately, as if she had been waiting for something like this. She pushed her hoodie back, revealing sharp, alert eyes that no longer looked tired or uninterested. They looked focused, calculating, alive. Her breathing stayed steady while everyone else's was uneven. Her pulse remained calm while others trembled. She wasn't reacting like the rest of the passengers, because she wasn't like the rest of them. Elira scanned the cabin with laser precision. She noticed the vibration pattern, the angle of the dip, the way the engines sputtered too inconsistently to be a simple malfunction. She studied every detail in seconds, the way someone trained, deeply trained would. A flight attendant stumbled as the plane shook again. She grabbed a seat to steady herself, panic clear in her eyes. Alira's voice cut through the noise, level and unshaken. "What system failed?" she asked. The attendant blinked, startled. I don't know yet. The captain said something about losing control. We're trying to." But Alira was no longer listening. She already had her answer. Her instincts were screaming at her, and her instincts had never been wrong. Passengers continued crying, praying, panicking, but Alira's expression only sharpened. She sat still, but her presence suddenly felt different, almost commanding. It was as if the air around her shifted, like a soldier waking up, like someone trained for crisis, not comfort. Someone special, someone dangerous, someone hidden. She closed her eyes for 1 second, inhaling deeply through her nose, grounding herself the way she had been taught years ago, in places no civilian ever saw, in missions that never made the news. And in that single breath, everything clicked into place. She knew what was happening. She knew what needed to be done. And she knew she could do it, because Alira, the quiet girl in seat 14A, the one everyone ignored, was not a normal passenger. She wasn't ordinary. She never had been. She opened her eyes again, steady, fearless. A flight attendant rushed past her toward the cockpit, panic still written all over her face. Alira unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up calmly, ignoring the chaos around her. "Ma'am, please sit." The attendant started, but stopped mid-sentence when she looked into Alira's eyes. Alira didn't say her name. She didn't reveal who she was. She simply spoke 4 words, "Take me to cockpit." And something in her voice, steady, commanding, trained, made the attendant obey without questioning. The other passengers barely noticed her walking forward, their minds consumed by fear. But if they had seen her clearly, if they had truly observed her in that moment, they might have realized what the F-22 pilots would soon discover. The quiet girl in seat 14A wasn't just a passenger. She had a call sign that once made enemies surrender and allies stand straighter. A call sign feared, respected, whispered in military circles like a legend. But for now, no one knew, not yet. All they saw was a silent girl walking toward the front of a dying aircraft. All they didn't know was she might be the only one who could save them. High above the clouds, where the sky stretched in endless shades of blue, 2 F-22 Raptors tore through the air at blistering speed. Their sleek bodies sliced through thin layers of atmosphere, engines roaring with a controlled fury. The call had come in less than 4 minutes earlier, an emergency declaration from civilian Flight 742, reporting catastrophic system failures at cruising altitude. Standard protocol dictated that a military escort be launched immediately, but this wasn't standard. The distress signals were messy, broken, and irregular, almost as if the aircraft itself was barely able to speak. Inside the Raptor cockpits, the pilots' helmets glowed with red indicators. Their screens displayed the struggling airliner ahead, altitude fluctuating, speed unstable, trajectory erratic. It was losing the fight with gravity, and fast. One wrong move, one more system failure, and the jet carrying hundreds of passengers would be nothing more than falling metal. "Raptor 1 to control," the lead pilot said, keeping his voice steady despite the urgent situation. "We have visual on Flight 742. Aircraft is unstable. Requesting immediate communication link. Copy, Raptor 1. Attempting to reach civilian cockpit now." Static filled the channel for several seconds, thick, uneven, uncomfortable. Then, faintly, the captain of Flight 742 answered, his voice shaking so badly it barely sounded like speech. We've lost primary controls, hydraulics unresponsive, trying to maintain altitude." The pilot exchanged a glance with his wingman, a silent, grim acknowledgement. This wasn't a minor malfunction. This was catastrophic. Chaos erupted across the frequencies. Air traffic control, emergency units, and military officers spoke over one another. It was a mess of clipped orders, panicked queries, and scrambled instructions. The Raptors flew tight formation beside the trembling airliner, watching pieces of its stabilizer shake violently under the stress of turbulence. Then came the critical question, the one protocol demanded when a civilian cockpit became compromised. Civilian Flight 742, identify any trained personnel on board. The Raptor pilot transmitted. They waited 10 seconds, 20, almost 30, silence. In those seconds, the pilots imagined the worst, that no one with training was on board, that the captain was losing consciousness, that the aircraft would begin its uncontrolled descent any moment. Now the wingman cursed under his breath. If there's no one else up there, this plane is done. The lead pilot didn't respond. He tightened his grip on the controls, eyes locked on the aircraft's trembling wings. His mind ran through possibilities: system failure, electrical fire, structural damage. Whatever it was, time was rapidly running out. They needed someone who understood aviation, someone who could take the controls if the pilots on board had failed. He repeated the transmission, voice more urgent this time. Flight 742, do you copy? Identify any trained personnel. But this time the reply did not come from the cockpit. It came from somewhere else, somewhere unexpected. A voice, calm, steady, almost unnervingly composed, cut cleanly through the static, slicing through the noise like a blade of ice. "This is Shadow 13, the female voice said. "I'm on board. Patch me to the cockpit." The Raptors froze. Every nerve, every breath, every thought in the cockpit went still. Shadow 13. It was a name that didn't belong in civilian airspace. A name whispered only in restricted briefings, a call sign that never showed up in official documents, only in locked files that even most commanders weren't allowed to open. The wingman was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "It can't be." The lead pilot swallowed hard. "You heard that too, right?" "I heard it," the wingman said, his pulse racing. "Shadow 13, here on a passenger jet." The call sign alone was enough to rattle even the most seasoned pilots. It belonged to a ghost, or so the legends went. She was a rumor, a shadow, a whisper that traveled through airbases and elite units, but never in the open. A pilot so skilled, so impossibly precise, that her missions were classified before they even happened. Some swore she didn't exist. Others believed she was a myth created to intimidate foreign forces. But the ones who knew, the ones who had ever crossed paths with her, never forgot. They spoke of a woman who flew with inhuman calm, who operated aircraft like extensions of her own body, who survived missions that no normal pilot should survive. The military called her the ghost of the Blue Line, and right now she was sitting somewhere on a commercial airliner, unnoticed, unrecognized, unseen. The lead Raptor pilot steadied his breathing and finally responded. "Shadow 13, confirm identity." But the woman didn't repeat herself. Her voice came again, even calmer than before, with a firm edge that told them she was done wasting time. "Patch me to the cockpit, that's an order." It didn't matter that she was on a civilian flight. It didn't matter that she wasn't technically in command. That voice, low, cold, decisive, had the weight of authority that came from surviving things no one else had. Her tone carried the sharp, controlled confidence of someone who had given orders at 40-0 feet while missiles screamed across her cockpit. Someone who had flown through storms that made radars blind. Someone who had earned her call sign through moments that would break normal pilots. The Raptors responded instantly. Affirmative, Shadow 13, establishing relay now. They didn't question it. They didn't argue, they followed. Because when a living legend speaks, you don't hesitate. Inside the airliner, Alira, the quiet girl from seat 14A whom passengers ignored, sat with her headset connected to an emergency channel, her profile calm as stone. Flight attendants around her looked stunned, unable to process what they had just heard. None of them knew what Shadow 13 meant. They only knew that she spoke with a confidence none of them understood. But the Raptors understood. Everyone on the military frequency understood, and the more they processed what was happening, the more impossible it felt. So she was just sitting there, the wingman murmured, still in disbelief, on a commercial flight. The lead pilot exhaled slowly. She's always been unpredictable. No one ever knows where she is. But seat 14A, the wingman pressed. No weapons, no aircraft, no tactical gear, just a hoodie and headphones. That's what makes her Shadow 13. The name echoed in both cockpits. It carried weight, heavy, mythic, terrifying, the kind of weight that made even elite fighter pilots feel unsteady. Suddenly, the military channels went quiet, eerily quiet, as if everyone on the frequency was holding their breath, listening. The lead pilot finally broke the silence, his voice soft but edged with awe. Shadow 13 back in action. The wingman nodded slowly, still watching the trembling airliner beside them. God help whoever stands in her way. But Shadow 13 didn't respond to their murmurs. She was already walking down the narrow aisle of the aircraft with steady steps, heading toward the cockpit that desperately needed someone like her. No one else on the plane knew her name. No one knew what she could do. No one knew what she had done before. But the Raptors knew. They knew that the moment she spoke, the entire sky shifted, because legends don't announce themselves. They just appear, and right now, the ghost the military tried so hard to hide was about to save 312 lives. The moment Elira stepped into the narrow corridor leading to the cockpit, the atmosphere changed. The cabin behind her buzzed with fear and whispered prayers, but the air ahead felt different, tighter, heavier, as if the aircraft itself was holding its breath. Flight attendants rushed beside her, guiding her through as turbulence shook the plane violently. Loose items rolled across the floor. Overhead bins trembled as though barely hanging on. Every flicker of the lights hinted at another system on the verge of collapse. When the cockpit door swung open, she was hit with a wall of flashing red warnings. Every instrument panel glowed like a battlefield, alarms screaming in overlapping shrieks, monitors blinking with errors, altitude indicators jumping wildly. The pilots were drenched in sweat, their breathing uneven, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear. The captain's hands trembled visibly as he tried to maintain some control, but it was clear he was losing the fight. Are you the trained personnel? He stammered, not even turning fully toward her. His voice broke mid-sentence as the aircraft lurched downward again. Elira didn't answer. She moved straight toward the captain's seat with a cold, focused determination. No hesitation, no panic. Her silence alone communicated more authority than any badge or uniform could. She gently placed a hand on the captain's shoulder. Move, she said softly, a single word delivered with the calmness of someone who had faced death more than once. The captain slid out of the seat without argument. At that moment, he didn't care who she was. All he cared about was survival, and something in Elira's eyes told him she knew exactly what she was doing. She sat down, strapping herself in with quick, decisive motions, the leather seat molded around her as if welcoming back someone who belonged there. Her fingers wrapped around the control yoke. They trembled for only a fraction of a second, not from fear, but from the aircraft's violent shaking. Then her hands went steady. Elira assessed the situation in a single sweeping glance. Autopilot dead. The warning for hydraulic system failure flashed in rhythmic pulses, each beep more urgent than the last. The pitch indicator showed a rapid, uncontrolled nose drop. Airspeed fluctuated dangerously, threatening to push the aircraft into a fatal descent. The entire cockpit felt like a sinking ship. Shadow 13, we're with you, came a firm voice through the headset. It was the lead F-22 pilot, his tone steady but undeniably tense. Her jaw tightened slightly, the only sign that she'd heard him. Raptors, hold formation, she replied. Her voice didn't waver, didn't crack, didn't show even a molecule of fear. I'm taking manual control. Then the world around her erupted again. The plane dipped forward violently, sending the nose downward with brutal force. The cabin behind her filled with screams. A flight attendant slammed into the wall. Someone shouted a prayer. Someone else sobbed uncontrollably. Luggage tumbled through the aisle like loose debris in a storm. But Elira didn't flinch. Her hands tightened around the yoke, muscles tensing as she fought against gravity's merciless pull. The control column shook so intensely that a normal pilot would have lost their grip. But she held on, jaw clenched, shoulders braced, her entire body syncing with the aircraft's motion. Every warning alarm felt like another voice screaming at her to give up. Stall warning, hydraulic failure. Altitude dropping, terrain ahead, but she silenced them in her mind. She focused on what mattered, the raw feel of the aircraft, the feedback through the controls, the way the nose reacted with every motion of her wrist. She had flown fighters before, she had flown prototypes. She had flown jets that were never meant to see public skies. And every single one of those experiences now surged through her muscles like instinct. Come on! She murmured under her breath, pushing the yoke forward, then pulling it back, testing the aircraft's remaining control surfaces. The response was sluggish, agonizingly slow, like trying to steer an elephant through quicksand. Tilts unresponsive, elevators barely reacting, she whispered to herself. But she wasn't panicking. She was calculating, adjusting, learning the aircraft's new limits in real time. Her breathing remained steady. Outside the cockpit windows, the F-22 Raptors flew tight formation, their pilots watching with a mixture of awe and disbelief. They could see the nose of the passenger jet dipping dangerously low, flirting with disaster. They could also see the micro adjustments Elira was making, movements so precise, so delicate, they looked impossible under such stressful conditions. She's fighting the whole aircraft by herself, the wingman whispered into the radio. She's Shadow 13, the lead pilot replied. She's done worse. Inside the cockpit, Elira pushed harder. Her arms trembled from the strain, not from fear, but from the physical battle against tons of failing machinery. Sweat formed at her temples, but her eyes remained laser, focused. The aircraft shuddered again. The altitude continued to drop. 30,000 FT, 28,000 FT, 26,000 FT. The descent was slowing slightly, but not enough. Alarms continued screaming. But Elira's voice remained like steel. Hydraulic line B still giving me partial control. She muttered, I can work with that. She adjusted the trim manually. She shifted her grip, applied counterforce. She rerouted control load to backup systems, something only a pilot with elite, near-military level instinct could do so quickly. Gradually, painfully, the nose of the aircraft began to rise, a little, just a little, but enough to buy them time. The intense downward vibration weakened. The horizon outside the cockpit windows leveled, still tilted, still unstable, but no longer pointing straight toward the earth. She's stopping the descent, the Raptor pilot reported. His voice carried a hint of awe he didn't bother hiding. Inside the jet, Elira breathed out slowly through her nose, a controlled exhale. Come on, hold together. She whispered, talking to the aircraft like it was a wounded teammate she refused to abandon. The plane trembled again, a reminder that it wasn't safe yet, but the altitude began stabilizing. 24,000 FT, 23,900 FT, 23,880 FT, then it stopped dropping. The cockpit fell into a strange, fragile silence. The alarms quieted slightly, no longer screaming at maximum intensity. The descent indicator leveled. Even the vibration under her palms softened, as though the aircraft itself was fighting alongside her. Hope returned. Behind the cockpit door, passengers felt the change too. Screams faded into shaky breaths. People clutched their armrests, stunned, confused, but suddenly not falling. A child whispered, Mom, did we stop? A woman broke into tears of relief. A man clasped his hands together and whispered a prayer of thanks, but Elira didn't celebrate. She couldn't. Not yet. Her muscles were still tense. Her eyes remained narrowed. She knew this victory was temporary, the equivalent of stopping a running avalanche with bare hands. But she also knew something else. She had control now, even if barely, even if fragile, even if temporary. But control was enough. It meant a chance, it meant hope, it meant survival wasn't impossible. Raptors. She said into the radio, her voice calmer than the storm around her. The aircraft has stabilized. I'm maintaining manual control. Prepare for further instructions. The Raptor lead pilot responded instantly, voice filled with respect. Yes, Shadow 13, we're on your wing. Elira tightened her grip. Her battle with gravity wasn't over, but she was no longer losing, and for the first time since the crisis began, Flight 742 was in the hands of someone who refused to let it fall. The runway looked impossibly long from the cockpit, yet somehow still too short for the damaged, trembling aircraft Elira was guiding toward it. Emergency crews lined both sides, fire trucks, ambulances, rescue units, all positioned with engines humming and lights flashing, prepared for the worst. Thousands of people had gathered on the perimeter of the airport, held back by barricades but unable to look away. News helicopters hovered above, cameras tracking the wounded Flight 742 as it crawled through the sky like a tired giant struggling to stay upright. Every eye on the ground reflected the same mixture of fear and hope. The world seemed to freeze, suspended between disaster and miracle. Inside the cockpit, Elira's breathing slowed to match the rhythm of the failing aircraft. Sweat dripped down the side of her face, caught briefly by the dim red glow of the warning lights before falling onto her collar. Her hands remained locked around the controls, fingers sore, muscles burning from the hours of non-stop manual fighting. Every surface of the cockpit shook beneath her touch, the yoke, the throttle, even the floor beneath her feet. The plane was holding together, but barely. Every turn, every correction, every shift in wind felt like it could tear the jet apart like paper. She glanced at the altitude, low, too low but steady. She checked the hydraulic pressure, almost gone. But just enough. The runway stretched far ahead, shimmering with heat and tension. Fire crews waited with hoses ready. Ground teams stood frozen, radios pressed to their ears. The tower had gone silent, afraid to breathe, afraid to interrupt the one person keeping this aircraft in the sky. Elira leaned forward slightly, her voice low, controlled, almost like a whisper meant only for the aircraft itself. Shadow 13 final approach. The radio crackled softly. The F-22 pilots heard her. The escort formation tightened around her like protective guardians escorting a fallen warrior home. Copy, Shadow 13. We're with you. The lead Raptor pilot answered, his voice heavy with respect. He had never seen flying like this, not from any fighter, not from any commander, not even in combat missions that had pushed him to the edge of death. What Elira had done was something else, something beyond training, something beyond logic. She had kept a dying aircraft alive by sheer force of will. The nose of Flight 742 dropped slightly, a minor adjustment, a dangerous one. Elira corrected it instantly, bleeding off altitude inch by inch. She could feel the tension in the metal beneath her, like the aircraft itself was begging her to hurry. Several control surfaces were unresponsive. The right aileron lagged, the stabilizer vibrated at unsafe frequency, and the landing gear indicator flickered as if unsure whether they would stay locked in place, but the wheels were down, and that meant she had a chance. Behind the cockpit, the cabin was silent except for scattered sobs. Passengers clutched hands, seatbelts, armrests, anything they could. Parents held their children tight. Strangers held each other. No one dared to look out the windows. They were afraid to see the ground rushing toward them. Afraid this miracle might vanish at the last second. Elira didn't look back. She couldn't. Her world had narrowed into one line, one perfect, precise alignment between aircraft and runway. She adjusted the throttle, steadying the descent. The left engine sputtered, coughing smoke into the sky, but she kept it alive. The right engine vibrated violently, threatening to stall. "Come on," she whispered to the aircraft again. "Just a little more." At 300 feet, the alarm screamed one last time, a desperate plea from a machine at its limit. "Terrain, pull up, nose angle unsafe." Elira ignored them. She knew exactly what she was doing. At 200 feet, the F-22 pilots held their breath. At 100 feet, the airport crowd fell silent. At 50 feet, the entire world seemed to stop turning, then impact. The landing gear slammed onto the runway with a bone-shaking crash. The entire fuselage groaned in pain. The aircraft bounced to hard, launching slightly back into the air, like a stone skipping across a lake. Gasps erupted from the ground crews. Someone shouted, "It's going back up." Another prayed under their breath. Elira didn't panic. Her hands remained steady. She forced the nose forward, forced the wheels down, forced the aircraft to stay on the ground. The jet hit the runway again. Another brutal bounce. Loose items flew through the cockpit. A panel snapped off the ceiling. One of the monitors shorted out, but Elira held on. She adjusted the flaps manually, despite the excruciating resistance, and finally, mercifully, the wheels connected solidly with the runway. Not bouncing, not lifting, just rolling, she slammed the brakes. Sparks flew beneath the tires. Smoke curled up from the runway. The aircraft swayed dangerously left, then right, the hydraulic system screaming as it tried to comply with her desperate commands. The speed dropped. 240 knots, 200, 180. Every reduction felt like a victory. Every second felt like a lifetime. The aircraft shuddered again, drifting dangerously toward the edge of the runway, but Elira corrected it barely. The wheels screeched, tires burning from the friction, but the jet continued to slow. 140 knots, 180, passengers cried. Some covered their ears, some prayed. Some whispered Elira's name without even knowing who she truly was. Finally, the plane rolled to a stop. For a moment, nothing moved. The aircraft sat in the middle of the runway, smoke rising from the landing gear, metal trembling from the strain, lights flickering like a heartbeat losing rhythm. Silence hung in the air, deep, heavy, impossible silence, then a scream, then another, then an explosion of applause, tears, and raw disbelief. Inside the cabin, people sobbed uncontrollably, others laughed in relief. A man dropped to his knees. A mother hugged her child so tightly the kid squeaked. A flight attendant covered her mouth, eyes overflowing with tears. They were alive, all 312 of them. Alive because of the quiet girl from seat 14A. Outside, the F-22 pilots circled low, their voices coming over the radio one last time. Steady, solemn, filled with the highest respect a military pilot could give. "Shadow 13, it's an honor flying with you." Elira closed her eyes for a second, just one, allowing herself to breathe. It wasn't pride she felt, it wasn't triumph, it was something deeper, something quiet. The feeling of someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side, not for glory, not for recognition, but simply because it was what she was trained to do. Emergency crews rushed toward the aircraft, spraying foam over the landing gear, checking the engines, preparing to evacuate passengers. Cameras zoomed in from every angle, reporters shouted questions, spectators screamed in relief, waving, crying, celebrating. But none of them knew the truth yet. None of them knew who she was, or what she had done before today, or why her call sign sent shivers through elite fighter pilots. All they knew was that a miracle had landed on their runway. And soon, very soon, the world would learn what the military already knew. The quiet girl in seat 14A wasn't just lucky. She wasn't just brave. She wasn't just skilled. She was Shadow 13, a legend, a ghost, a protector hidden among ordinary people. "A hero!"